My mother shrieked, "You're nothing but a parasite," and hurled my crutches onto the driveway. "Go drain someone else." I left. A month later, my father called in a panic. "Why are the rental property smart locks dead?" I texted back, "Ask the parasite." Then, the chaos began. After a devastating motorcycle accident left me with $42,000 in medical debt and a shattered tibia, I had no choice but to move into my parents' finished basement in Portland. I thought it would be a temporary 6-month recovery. It wasn't. My dad, Gerald, was a passive ghost who preferred his woodworking over confrontation. But my mom, Norma, made sure I felt the weight of my existence every single day. Electricity isn't free. She'd snap if I left the bathroom light on. When I tried to do my own laundry, she'd rip the clothes out of the washer, complaining I was using the expensive detergent. When I did my physical therapy exercises in the living room, she acted like my groans of pain were a personal insult to her peaceful afternoon. Then there was my younger sister, Paige. She was 25, a junior partner at a corporate law firm, and the undisputed star of the family. She came over for brunch every Sunday, and Mom's entire demeanor would shift from warden to a proud, glowing host. Paige just booked a 2-week trip to Tuscany, Mom announced one morning while I was struggling to make oatmeal. It must be nice to actually achieve things instead of dragging everyone else down. I used my background in network engineering to overhaul their lucrative backyard Airbnb cottage. I installed a commercial-grade Wi-Fi mesh network, set up automated climate control, and integrated a remote smart lock system that managed guest check-ins. The breaking point happened during Paige's engagement barbecue. I was sitting at a patio table, keeping my elevated leg out of the way, trying to stay invisible. Mom clinked her champagne glass to Paige, who actually knows how to build a future instead of just taking up space. A few relatives chuckled. I put down my paper plate and hobbled toward the basement. The next morning, she stood at the top of the stairs. "I need $800 for this month's utilities. We've babied you enough. You're nothing but a parasite." I packed my essentials into 2 garbage bags, called a buddy with a truck, and moved out still wearing my walking boot. I slept on an air mattress in a cramped studio in Beaverton, taking on aggressive freelance coding contracts until I landed a salaried position as a systems architect. It was a tiny space, but it was mine. A month after she kicked me out, my phone lit up at 4:15 p.m. on a Friday. It was Gerald. "The Airbnb cottage is offline," he panicked. "We have VIP guests arriving from Seattle in an hour, and the digital locks are dead. The thermostat is frozen." What happened? I had built that entire local server infrastructure. The main hosting account and software licenses were registered under my name and tied to my personal credit card. I had canceled the subscription renewals the day I moved out. I typed a single reply, "Ask the parasite." My phone exploded. 7 missed calls from Mom, frantic voicemails from Dad begging me to fix it because they were facing a massive refund and a permanent ban from the rental platform. I ignored them all until 5:30 p.m. When I picked up, Gerald sounded breathless. "Please, the guests are sitting in their car in the driveway. Your mother is having a meltdown." I kept my voice deadpan. "I didn't break anything. The server hosting expired. You locked yourselves out. A month ago, she threw my crutches into the street and called me a parasite in front of the neighbors. You stood there and watched. Now you want free tech support." He mumbled a pathetic excuse. "I will restore the network. But first, I want an apology." From her, on speakerphone. Without a single excuse. The line went silent for a full minute. Then I heard her voice, strained and bitter. "I'm sorry. I restored the network access remotely, letting the guests inside." Months drifted by. I heard through the grapevine that Mom was telling everyone I had extorted them, while Dad was stressing over the new dashboard interface. I didn't care. I was healing, sitting at my desk in my new downtown apartment, watching the rain hit the glass. Then, at 11:47 p.m., an unknown number sent me a single photo, the cottage, padlocked and wrapped in sheriff's tape. Underneath it, 4 words, "She's pressing criminal charges." The text came from an unsaved number, but the area code was local. I stared at the yellow tape cutting across the gray cedar siding of the cottage. The photo was grainy, taken from the edge of the rhododendron bushes by the driveway. I tried to call the number back immediately, but it went straight to a generic, unconfigured voicemail greeting. I didn't sleep that night. My tibia always ached when the weather turned damp, a dull, deep throb where the titanium rod was bolted to the bone. I paced the laminate floor of my apartment, my bare feet sticking slightly to the surface, checking my Oz console every 20 minutes. The cloud instances were clean. The logs showed no activity from my IP address since the evening I restored their access. I had handed over the master administrative credentials to Gerald via a registered letter 3 weeks prior, explicitly stating I was terminating my maintenance of their network. At 8:14 am on Monday, the reality arrived in the form of a voicemail from Detective Vance at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. His voice was flat, professional, and entirely devoid of drama. He left a case number and asked me to call him back regarding an investigation into computer crime and commercial mischief. I didn't call him first. I called an old college friend, Adele Fairfax, who practiced civil law in downtown Portland. She wasn't a criminal defense attorney, but she knew the ecosystem. She told me to meet her at a diner on Southeast Hawthorne by 10:00 am. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. Adele was already sitting in a vinyl booth, reviewing some documents on her tablet. I slid in opposite her, my stiff leg awkwardly catching the edge of the table leg. I laid my phone on the table and let her listen to the voicemail. "Computer crime, under Oregon Revised Statute 164. 377 is no joke," Adele said, setting her coffee mug down with a small clink. "It covers unauthorized access to a computer system with the intent to alter, damage, or extract data. Did you touch anything after that Friday night?" "No," I said. "I transferred the root keys to my dad. I have the certified mail receipt at my apartment. I signed signed out of the Oz console, revoked my personal credit card from the billing profile, and let the instance roll over to his name. If the locks died again, it's because he didn't update the payment method. It doesn't matter what actually happened right now, Adele replied, leaning forward. What matters is what Norma told the police. If she told them you held their business hostage for money, or that you systematically shut down their infrastructure to damage their income, a detective has to look into it, especially if Paige helped her draft the initial complaint. That was the twist that made my stomach drop. Paige, she knew the law. She didn't do criminal law. Her firm handled mid-market mergers, but she knew how to structure an allegation to make it stick to the ribs of a county prosecutor. Adele gave me the name of a criminal defense lawyer, a guy named Holt Novak who ran a 2-room office near the courthouse. His retainer was $3,500. I looked at my checking account balance on my phone while sitting in the diner booth. After paying my first and last month's rent on the downtown apartment and clearing another chunk of the hospital debt, I had $4,100 left. I authorized the wire transfer to Novak's firm before I even left the restaurant. By Tuesday afternoon, Holt Novak had reviewed the basic timeline. We sat in his office, which smelled like old paper and wet wool from his raincoat hanging behind the door. He was a thick-set man with graying hair and an unfiltered way of speaking. Your mother is claiming a total loss of $14,000 in canceled reservations and platform penalties, Holt said, flipping through a copy of the police report he'd pulled. She's alleging that you deliberately used administrative backdoors to sabotage the rental unit during a high-value booking period as an act of familial retaliation. She also threw in a line about you threatening her on the phone. I asked for an apology, I said, my voice rising. She called me a parasite on the driveway. She threw my crutches when I couldn't walk. I didn't threaten anyone. I just told them I wouldn't do free labor for people who treated me like garbage. Calm down, Holt muttered, not unkindly. The detective isn't stupid, but he has a complainant who has receipts for lost income and a daughter who is a partner at a prominent firm providing neat little folders of network diagrams. Here's the kicker. The sheriff's tape in the photo you received, that wasn't from the county. The county doesn't tape up a house for a digital lock dispute. The cottage was padlocked because of a zoning and code violation complaint filed anonymously on Saturday morning. I blinked. Anonymously? Yeah. Someone tipped off the city compliance office that the cottage was operating as a commercial hospitality space without a certified commercial fire system or a valid short-term rental permit for the detached structure. The city inspectors went out there, found the guests locked out on the lawn from another system crash over the weekend, and shut the whole operation down on the spot. Norma thinks you filed the code complaint out of spite after the Friday incident. I didn't, I said. I didn't even know they didn't have a permit. Dad told me he handled the city paperwork 3 years ago when they converted the woodworking shed. Well, he didn't, Holt said, or it expired. Either way, the cottage is dark. Their income stream is gone. And Norma is looking for someone to blame for the ruin of her retirement fund. We need to get ahead of the detective's interview. I'm going to bring you in with me on Thursday morning. Don't speak unless I tell you to. When I left Holt's office, the rain had stopped, leaving the Portland streets gray and slick. My phone rang as I reached the Max Light rail station. It was Gerald. His voice didn't have the panic it had on Friday. It sounded older, thin, and scraped out. You need to drop this, Soren, he said, using my name for the first time in weeks. You need to tell the city you made a mistake or fix the server. Your mother isn't sleeping. Paige says if this goes to the district attorney, it's going to ruin your sister's standing at the firm. We're a family. You stood on the driveway and watched her throw my crutches into the oil stains, Dad, I said, the words coming out cold and steady. Where was the family then? She was stressed, he whispered. The medical bills were coming to the house. We couldn't afford the insurance adjustments. You don't know what it's like to look at your retirement and see nothing but red ink. I have $42,000 in debt and an iron rod in my leg, I said. I know exactly what red ink looks like. He hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, Wednesday, an email arrived from Paige's corporate address. It wasn't a legal filing. It was a formal memorandum with the subject line, confidential settlement offer and release of liability. She had drafted it himself. The terms were specific. I would sign over all rights to the local network configuration, provide a notarized affidavit stating that the lock failures were due to an unintentional technical oversight during termination of services, and pay a sum of $6,000 for restoration of business continuity. In exchange, Norma would withdraw the police report, and the family would sign a non-disparagement agreement. I forwarded it to Holt immediately. 10 minutes later, he called me. Your sister is smart, but she's desperate, Holt said. She's trying to use the threat of a criminal investigation to force a civil settlement that clears her parents' liability with the city. If you sign this, you admit to negligence, which means their insurance might cover the city fines, and you get left with a $6,000 bill and a signed confession. What do we do? I asked. We go to the sheriff's office tomorrow, Holt said, and we bring the one thing they don't think we have, the actual server history from the local gateway. I told you, I cleared my access, I said. You cleared your interactive access, Holt replied, and I could hear the dry smile in his voice. But you're a network architect, Soren. Tell me you didn't leave an automated log dump running to an off-site archive during the setup phase. I sat frozen at my desk. I had forgotten. 2 years ago, when I first built the node, the local ISP kept dropping packets on the hill near Council Crest. I had set up a simple syslog daemon on a micro instance in a free tier account to monitor connection stability. It was still collecting metadata. It didn't contain guest names or private information, just system states, device authentications, and IP addresses. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying over the mechanical keyboard, digging through old configuration files until I found the long-forgotten endpoint. The data stream was still there, a wall of gray text and timestamps stretching back months. I began to scroll through the log entries from last weekend, looking at the exact moments the locks failed. What I found wasn't wasn't an expired license or a payment glitch. At 11:12 p.m. on Friday night, 6 hours after I had restored access and handed the keys to Gerald, someone had logged into the local router from an internal IP address inside the main house. They had attempted to change the DN's routing to bypass the Oz gateway entirely, likely trying to remove my architecture so they wouldn't have to owe me an apology or an explanation. But whoever did it didn't know how to configure the subnets. They had crashed the local DCP server, locking out every device on the property, including their own smart TV and the cottage locks. The IP address that initiated the change belonged to a device named Page Laptop MVP. I downloaded the raw log file, encrypted it, and sent the hash to Holt. My sister hadn't just tried to fix the network, she had broken it herself while trying to excise me from the system, and then she had let her mother blame me for the damage to pressure me into a settlement. Thursday morning was cold. The interview room at the sheriff's station had no windows, just a laminate table and 3 plastic chairs that scraped loudly against the linoleum. Detective Vance sat across from Holt and me, a manila folder open between us. Holt didn't wait for Vance to start his speech. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a bound folder containing the printed log sheets, the certified mail receipt to Gerald, and a copy of Page's settlement email. "Detective," Holt said, his voice dropping into that rhythmic, heavy cadence he used in court. "Before we discuss my client's alleged involvement, we'd like to submit evidence regarding the actual source of the network failure on Friday night. My client had completely severed his administrative relationship with the property. The system was functional until 23 minutes past 11, when a third party inside the main residence attempted an unauthorized modification of the routing tables." Vance looked at the logs, his brow furrowing as his finger traced the line showing Page Laptop MVP executing an unverified command string. "This name," Vance said, looking up. "The sister?" "The sister," Holt said, "who happens to be an attorney currently threatening my client with criminal prosecution unless he pays her parents $6,000 to cover up their lack of a city business permit. That's not an investigation, detective. That's an attempt to use your office as leverage for civil extortion." Vance sat back, his pen clicking once, twice against the table. He looked at me, then back at the folder. He didn't look angry, he looked tired. "I'm going to need some time to verify these timestamps with the service provider," he said. "Take all the time you need," Holt said, rising from his chair and adjusting his coat. "But my client won't be making any further statements, and if any member of the family contacts him again regarding this matter, we'll be filing for a stalking protective order by 5 o'clock today." We walked out into the gray light of the parking lot. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, but the throb in my tibia hadn't stopped. It wasn't over. As I reached the sidewalk, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't a call or a text from my parents. It was an automated notification from LinkedIn. "Paige Thorne has viewed your profile." She was watching. She knew the interview had happened, and she knew the settlement offer had remained unsigned. I stood on the corner of the street, the cold air hitting my face, realizing that the family dynamic hadn't just fractured. It had completely dissolved into a tactical standoff where every move was being measured in inches. I locked the screen and slid the phone into my jacket pocket. The Max train arrived with a heavy metallic screech, and I found a window seat, stretching my stiff leg out into the aisle so the knee wouldn't lock up. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. The damp chill of the Portland afternoon had settled deep into the titanium hardware in my shin. The next morning, the reality of Paige's tactical shift became clear. I was sitting at my desk at the new firm, sipping bitter break room coffee and reviewing a server migration plan, when my manager, Sullivan, tapped on my cubicle partition. "Soren," Sullivan said. He was a guy in his late 40s, usually laid back, but his jaw was tight and his eyes darted toward the open floor plan. "Can you step into my office for a minute? Shut the door behind you." I followed him. On his desk was a single sheet of heavy stock paper. It bore the embossed letterhead of Paige's law firm. It was a formal notice of anticipated litigation and request for preservation of digital assets. "HR got this via courier 20 minutes ago," Sullivan said, tapping the corner of the paper with his index finger. "They forwarded it directly to me. It says you're involved in a pending civil dispute regarding unauthorized access to commercial networks, and it's requesting that our company preserve all your local machine data, work emails, and server logs." "What the hell is this, Soren?" My stomach hit the floor. It was a classic scorched earth tactic. She knew she had no legal grounds to subpoena my current employer over a residential network dispute, but she also knew that sending a scary legal document to a new hire's boss was the fastest way to make me look like a corporate liability. She was trying to cut off my income. She wanted me broke, desperate, and compliant. I took a breath, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "It's a family dispute, Sullivan. My sister is an attorney at that firm. She's representing my parents in a fight over a smart home network I built for their property months before I started working here. They're trying to scare me into signing a settlement by spooking my employer." Sullivan sighed and rubbed his temples, leaning back in his chair. "Listen to me. You're a good architect. Your code is clean, and you work hard. But you've been here 3 weeks. I don't want HR breathing down my neck about potential data liabilities. You need to handle this immediately. If we get an actual subpoena, or if this escalates and starts costing the legal department billable hours, I can't protect your job." "I'll handle it," I said. "It won't touch this office again." I walked back to my desk, my hands shaking slightly, and grabbed my car keys. I took my lunch break in the driver's seat of my Civic in the parking garage and called Holt. I read the letter to him word for word over the Bluetooth connection. Holt let out a dry, rasping laugh that sounded like sandpaper on wood. "She's playing dirty now. That's a desperation move. Vance must have called her this morning to ask about her laptop's IP address showing up in those server logs. She knows the criminal complaint is dead in the water, so she's trying to ruin your livelihood before you can retaliate. It's working, I said, watching the rain streak the windshield. My boss is completely spooked. Can she actually subpoena my work computer? No judge in this county will sign off on a subpoena for your new employer's hardware over a residential lock dispute, Holt said dismissively. It's purely intimidation. It's also incredibly stupid. But I can make it stop today. I'm going to send a counter notice to the managing ethics partner at her firm, CCing Paige. I will politely remind them that using firm resources, courier accounts, and letterhead to harass an opposing party's employer in a personal family dispute is a fantastic way to get a formal bar complaint filed for professional misconduct. Do it, I said. Charge my card for whatever time it takes to draft it. Already drafting it in my head. Keep your head down, Soren, Holt said, and hung up. That evening, the social barrage began. If Paige was handling the legal terrorism, Norma had taken charge of the public relations campaign. It started with a text from my Aunt Sylvie, Norma's older sister, who lived across the river in Vancouver. Soren, your mother called me crying hysterically. What are you doing? She says you're trying to send her and Paige to jail over a misunderstanding about the Wi-Fi. They took you in when you were crippled and broke. This is how you repay them? Call her and apologize. Now, I stared at the glowing screen in my dark kitchen. I hadn't eaten dinner. The fridge was mostly empty anyway, just a carton of milk and some leftover takeout. The word crippled stung more than I expected it to. That was how Norma had framed my motorcycle accident to the rest of the extended family. Not as a traumatic injury I was actively recovering from, but as a permanent burden they had heroically shouldered. 2 more texts followed within the hour. One from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, calling me an ungrateful prick. Norma was rallying the troops. She was controlling the narrative, painting herself as the victim of a vindictive, tech-savvy son who had sabotaged her retirement livelihood and was now sicking the police on his own flesh and blood out of spite. I didn't reply to any of them. I muted the notifications, poured myself a glass of tap water, and swallowed 2 ibuprofen to dull the ache in my leg. At 9:15 p.m., my phone rang. It was an unlisted number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. Same number. I answered it, putting it on speakerphone and setting it on the laminate countertop. Hello? The ethics complaint threat was a cute trick. Paige's voice came through the speaker. It wasn't the polished, arrogant tone she used at Sunday brunch, the one that always made Mom beam with pride. It was brittle, tight with a suppressed, vibrating rage that sounded entirely too much like our mother. Don't call me, I said, reaching to end the call. Wait, she snapped. Just listen to me for 1 minute, Soren. You think you've won because you found some old server logs? You haven't won anything. You're just dragging this out and hurting Mom and Dad. You logged into the router page, you crashed the DCP server and locked them out of their own property. Then you let Mom blame me. You helped her file a false police report. Now you're sending fake preservation letters to my boss. I kept my voice flat, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she was digging for. I'm not dragging anything out. I'm just watching you dig a hole. The city fines are up to $9,000, she said, her voice dropping into a desperate hiss, ignoring my accusation entirely. They're citing the property for daily commercial operation without a permit until the structure is physically modified to remove the kitchen. Mom and Dad don't have the cash. Their homeowner's insurance denied the liability claim because they were operating an unpermitted business. They are going to lose the cottage. Sounds like a problem for a junior partner at a law firm to solve, I said. I'm offering you $12,000, Paige said. The number hung in the quiet air of my apartment. Double the original offer. 12 grand. I can authorize the cash transfer by tomorrow afternoon, she continued, her words rushing together now. You sign the ENDA. You sign an affidavit taking full technical responsibility for the network failure so we can appeal the insurance denial, and you drop the bar complaint threat against my firm. I leaned my weight against the kitchen counter. You want me to commit insurance fraud so you don't look bad to your partners. I want you to stop destroying this family over a grudge, she yelled, her professional composure finally shattering into pieces. Mom is on anti-anxiety medication. Dad isn't sleeping. He's talking about taking out a second mortgage on the house just to pay the city compliance fees. You made your point, Soren. You proved you're the smartest guy in the room. Now take the money and walk away. Mom threw my crutches onto the concrete page. You toasted to me taking up space at your engagement party while I sat in the corner trying not to exist. I looked out the window at the city lights blurring through the rain. Keep your 12 grand. I don't want your money. I don't want anything from you. Soren, if you don't sign this, I swear to God I will. I tapped the red button, ending the call, and immediately went into my settings to block the number. The silence in the apartment rushed back in, heavy and thick. I stood there in the dark, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound, waiting for the next move. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, the silence broke not with a legal threat, but with the crushing, mundane reality of being alive in America. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I stared at the screen, fully expecting another one of Norma's flying monkeys, but the caller ID showed a toll-free number. It was the billing department for Providence Hospital. A woman named Cora, whose voice sounded like she had been drinking lukewarm break room coffee since dawn, politely informed me that my grace period was over. The $42,000 in out-of-pocket expenses for the titanium rod in my leg, the 3 surgeries, and the physical therapy was now officially due. If I didn't set up a payment plan today, they were sending it to a third-party collection agency, which would absolutely torch my credit score, the same credit score I needed to pass the probationary background check for my new systems architect job. I sat on the edge of my mattress, rubbing the scar on my shin, and negotiated a massive chunk of my monthly income away. We settled on $600 a month. It was a brutal hit. Between the rent on the downtown apartment, groceries, and now this, I was going to be living on ramen and tap water despite the salaried position. We appreciate your cooperation, Soren, Cora said mechanically. I'll email the digital signature forms for the direct debit. Have a nice day. I hung up, looking at the gray morning light filtering through the blinds. Last night, Paige had offered me 12 grand in cash to make her problem go away. It would have covered 20 months of my medical debt payments. It would have given me breathing room. But signing that ENDA and the affidavit would have meant legally putting my head on the chopping block for an unpermitted commercial property. If the city's building inspectors found out I falsified documents regarding the network infrastructure to help them dodge liability, I wouldn't just lose my job. I could face actual civil fraud charges. I took a hot shower, trying to unknot the tension in my shoulders, and took the MAX train to the office. By 10:30, I was buried in a migration protocol when my desk phone rang. It was Holt. Did it work? I asked, keeping my voice low so the surrounding cubicles couldn't hear. Like a charm, Holt chuckled, a rough, scraping sound. I didn't even have to send the formal letter to the ethics board. I just drafted the counter notice and faxed it directly to the managing partner of your sister's firm, a guy named Whitmore. I CC'd Paige on it. It took exactly 14 minutes for Whitmore to call my office. I stopped typing. What did he say? He was furious. Not at us. At Paige. Apparently, she didn't just use the firm's letterhead. She used her corporate courier account to send that threat to your boss, Sullivan, that makes the firm legally liable for harassment in a private domestic dispute. Whitmore practically broke his own neck apologizing to me over the phone. He assured me, in writing, that the firm of Wyndham and Cahill has zero involvement in Norma Thorne's residential code violations, and that the preservation notice sent to your employer is fully retracted. A massive weight lifted off my chest. So Sullivan is in the clear. Sullivan is in the clear. Your job is safe, and your sister just got marched into a senior partner's office for the chewing out of a lifetime, Holt said. She jeopardized her junior partnership to play enforcer for your mother. I doubt she'll be sending any more fake subpoenas. Thank you, Holt. Send me the invoice for the hour. Already in your inbox. Stay out of the rain, kid. I spent the rest of the day actually doing my job, feeling a strange, hollow sense of victory. I had successfully defended myself. Paige was neutralized, at least professionally. Norma's criminal complaint was dead on arrival thanks to the server logs. They had no leverage left. But as I left the office building at 5 o'clock and stepped out into the steady Portland drizzle, the victory felt cold. I didn't want to destroy my sister's career. I hadn't wanted any of this. I just wanted to recover from a shattered leg without being treated like a financial parasite by the people who were supposed to be my safety net. I bought a cheap slice of pizza from a window on Burnside and walked the 6 blocks back to my apartment building. I swiped my fob at the glass entry door, shook the water off my umbrella, and walked toward the elevator bank. That's when I saw him. Gerald was sitting on the faux leather bench across from the mailboxes. He was wearing his old green canvas work jacket, the one that always smelled faintly of cedar sawdust and machine oil. His hair was plastered to his forehead from the rain, and he looked incredibly small. He didn't look like a man who owned $1 million property in the West Hills. He looked like an old, tired ghost. He stood up when he saw me. He didn't approach aggressively. He just held his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. Dad, I said, stopping a few feet away. I didn't invite him up. Soren, he said, his voice raspy. I've been sitting here for 2 hours. I didn't know your apartment number. How did you know where I live? Paige pulled the address from the courier receipt she sent to your office, he admitted, looking down at the scuffed toes of his boots. I tightened my grip on the handle of my umbrella. If she sent you here to offer me more money, you can turn around. I'm not committing insurance fraud for you. She didn't send me, Gerald said quickly, looking up. His eyes were red-rimmed. She doesn't know I'm here. Neither does your mother. Norma is in bed. She hasn't gotten out of bed since Wednesday. I didn't say anything. I just waited. The city inspector didn't just cite us for the commercial operation, Gerald said, his voice dropping to a near whisper in the empty lobby. When they came out to put the padlock on the door, they ran the parcel history. The original woodworking shed didn't have the proper setbacks from the property line. When we converted it to the Airbnb, we tapped into the main sewer line without a permit. The electrical panel isn't up to code for a dwelling unit. I knew where this was going. They're condemning it. Gerald nodded, a single jerky motion. We have 30 days to physically demolish the interior framing and cap the plumbing, or they start fining us $500 a day. The demolition alone is going to cost $20,000. The initial fines are another $9,000. We don't have it, Soren. We spent the liquid savings on Paige's law school loans and the engagement party. The homeowner's insurance is threatening to drop the main house entirely because of the unpermitted structure. You want me to feel sorry for you, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I want you to know that we are losing everything, Gerald said. The supplemental income from that cottage was paying the property taxes. Without it, we have to sell the house. We have to leave Portland. You should have thought about that before Mom threw my crutches into the driveway, I said, my voice rising just enough to echo off the tile walls. You should have thought about that before she called me a parasite in front of the neighbors. You stood there, Dad. You watched her do it. You watched me pack garbage bags while I couldn't even put weight on my left leg. You let her kick me out into the street over a light switch and laundry detergent. I was a coward, Gerald whispered. He pulled his hands out of his pockets. They were shaking. I've always been a coward when it comes to her. I know that. I'm sorry. It's too late for sorry, I said. I owe $42,000 in medical debt. I set up a payment plan today that's going to bleed me dry for the next 7 years. Where was my bailout? Where was my $12,000 offer when I was eating painkillers and sleeping on a deflating air mattress in Beaverton? Gerald closed his eyes, a tear finally slipping down his weathered cheek, catching in his gray stubble. He reached into the inside pocket of his canvas jacket and pulled out a thick folded manila envelope. He held it out to me. I didn't come here to ask you to sign Paige's paper, he said. I told them both to stop. I told Norma she has to face what she did. I just came to give you this. I didn't reach for it. What is it? It's the title to your motorcycle, Gerald said. The one from the crash. You left it in the lockbox in the basement. I paid the impound fees from the towing yard 3 months ago so they wouldn't auction it for scrap. I kept it in the back of my shop. It's totaled, but the engine block is still good. You could probably sell it for parts. Get a couple $1,000 for it. I stared at the envelope. He had paid the impound fees while I was living in the basement, while Norma was charging me for electricity. He had done it in secret. Slowly, I reached out and took the envelope. The paper was slightly damp from the rain. Goodbye, Soren, Gerald said softly. He turned around and walked toward the glass doors, pushing them open and stepping out into the dark, wet street without looking back. I stood in the lobby for a long time, listening to the hum of the elevator mechanics. My leg was throbbing. I finally went upstairs to my apartment, dropped my wet coat on a chair, and sat at my desk. I opened the envelope. The motorcycle title was in there, signed over to me, along with the receipt from the impound lot. But there was something else tucked behind it, a piece of heavy cream-colored paper. It wasn't from Gerald. It was a letter, folded neatly into thirds. I pulled it out and opened it. The letterhead was unmistakable. Wyndham and Cahill, attorneys at law. It was typed, but it wasn't a legal threat. It was a direct correspondence. Dear Mr. Thorne, my name is Arthur Whitmore. I am the senior managing partner at Wyndham and Cahill. Your attorney, Mr. Novak, recently brought a highly concerning matter to my attention regarding the unauthorized use of our firm's resources by one of our junior associates, your sister, Paige Thorne. While I have assured Mr. Novak that our firm has no part in your family's civil dispute, the internal audit triggered by this event has revealed several irregularities regarding Paige's recent billing hours and her use of our proprietary legal databases to conduct background asset searches that appear to be directed at you and your current employer. I prefer to handle personnel matters quietly and without the involvement of the State Bar Ethics Committee. However, to fully understand the scope of our firm's liability in this matter, I need to know exactly what Paige has been sending you. I would like to invite you to my office on Monday morning at 9 a.m. for a brief, off-the-record conversation. I am prepared to compensate you for your time. Sincerely, Arthur Whitmore. I laid the letter on the desk next to the motorcycle title. Paige hadn't just used the courier service. She had used the firm's private investigative tools to dig into my life, looking for leverage, looking for my new employer's information. She had committed a massive ethical violation, and her boss had caught the digital trail. Now, the senior partner of a major corporate law firm wanted to sit down with me. He didn't want to bully me. He wanted me to hand him the nails to seal Paige's professional coffin, just to protect his own firm from the fallout. I looked at the rain hitting the glass of my apartment window. The family dynamic had moved way past an argument over an Airbnb lock. It had become a slow-motion demolition, and I was holding the detonator. I didn't call Holt until Saturday morning. I waited until 9, poured a cup of stale drip coffee, and dialed his cell. He answered on the second ring, the sound of a dog barking faintly in the background. I read the letter to him word for word, tracing the embossed edge of the paper with my thumb. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. Arthur Whitmore, Holt finally said, his voice thick with morning gravel. He's a shark, Soren. He doesn't invite people to his office to chat. He invites them to sign things. He said he wants to compensate me for my time. He wants to buy a release of liability, Holt corrected. Paige didn't just use the courier account. If she used their proprietary databases, LexisNexis, Westlaw Public Records, skip tracing software, to run background checks on you and your employer, she violated federal data privacy laws. She used a corporate tool for personal harassment. If you sue the firm for that, their malpractice insurance premiums go through the roof, and they have to disclose the breach to their enterprise clients. Whitmore is trying to put a lid on this before it boils over. Should I go? We are going, Holt said. I'll meet you in the lobby of their building at 8:45 on Monday. Wear a suit. Don't speak unless I ask you a direct question. We're going to let Arthur do all the talking. The rest of the weekend dragged like a dead weight. I tried to focus on some freelance coding, but my mind kept drifting back to the manila envelope sitting on my kitchen counter. The motorcycle title. Gerald's quiet, broken apology. My parents were going to lose the house. Paige was on the verge of losing her career. A month ago, I had just been a guy in a basement trying to navigate the stairs with a shattered leg, eating their contempt because I had no other choice. Now, the entire family structure was collapsing, and they were all looking at me as the architect of their ruin. I hadn't built the trap, but I had definitely stopped trying to save them from it. Monday morning was crisp and clear, the kind of rare, bright Portland day that made the glass high-rises downtown look like polished ice. Wyndham and Cahill occupied the top 3 floors of a tower on 6th Avenue. The lobby was all brushed steel and imported Italian marble. It smelled like expensive espresso and floor wax. Holt was waiting by the elevator bank. He looked different in a tailored charcoal suit, sharper, the rumpled county courthouse vibe entirely gone. He nodded at me, checked his watch, and hit the up button. We rode to the 32nd floor in silence. The reception area was expansive, with sweeping views of Mount Hood out the east-facing windows. The receptionist, a woman with flawless makeup and a headset, smiled professionally and asked us to wait. We didn't wait long. A young paralegal escorted us down a long hallway lined with frosted glass doors, stopping at the corner office. Arthur Whitmore was sitting behind a massive walnut desk. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair meticulously parted and wire-rimmed glasses. He stood up when we entered, buttoning his suit jacket. Mr. Thorne, he said, extending a hand to me, then turning to Holt. Mr. Novak, thank you both for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries, Arthur, Holt said, taking one of the leather chairs opposite the desk. My client took time out of his new job to be here. What exactly did the internal audit find? Whitmore didn't blink at the abruptness. He sat back down, folding his hands over a pristine legal pad. It found that Paige Thorne executed 74 unauthorized queries through our investigative databases over the past 3 weeks, Whitmore said, his voice even and devoid of emotion. "She accessed your financial records, Mr. Thorne, your credit history, your current employment verification, the tax records of your landlord, and the corporate filing structure of your new employer. She then used our secure courier system to send a fraudulent preservation notice to your manager." Hearing the exact number, 74 queries, made my stomach turn. She hadn't just looked me up. She had systematically hunted through my life, looking for any weak point, any pressure valve she could squeeze to force me to surrender to Norma. "That is a massive violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, as well as several state privacy statutes," Holt said smoothly. "And because she did it using your IP addresses and your firm's credentials, Wyndham and Cahill is the entity holding the bag. Which is why you are here," Whitmore acknowledged. He opened a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the polished walnut toward me. I looked at it. It was a settlement agreement. "Paige Thorne's employment with this firm is being terminated, effective immediately," Whitmore said. "Her security clearance was revoked on Friday evening. However, because of the nature of her misconduct, the firm is exposed. I am offering you $25,000, Mr. Thorne. In exchange, you will sign this non-disclosure agreement and a full waiver releasing Wyndham and Cahill from any civil liability regarding your sister's unauthorized searches. You will also agree not to file a formal complaint with the Oregon State Bar." I stared at the number printed on the page. $25,000. If I signed it, more than half of my medical debt would be wiped out by tomorrow afternoon. I wouldn't have to live on ramen and tap water. I wouldn't have to panic every time the phone rang with an unknown number. I could finally breathe. "And Paige?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet office. "Miss Thorne will be fired for cause," Whitmore said simply. "Without a bar complaint, she keeps her license, but she will not receive a recommendation from this firm. Given the tight-knit nature of the corporate law community in Portland, she will find it exceedingly difficult to secure a comparable position." She was done. The junior partner, the golden child, the one who toasted to my uselessness at her engagement party. Her career was going to be ashes by noon. Holt leaned over, reading the document. "The number is 35, he said to Whitmore without looking up. 35,000. And my client gets a copy of the audit log showing exactly what she accessed, so he can monitor his credit and identity for any fallout. You pay that, and he signs." Whitmore looked at Holt for a long moment, then reached for his silver fountain pen. "Agreed. I will have the revised draft and the wire transfer authorization sent to your office by 2 o'clock today. We'll review it then," Holt said, standing up. "Come on, Soren." I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting. I felt numb. I had just made $35,000 in 10 minutes, and all it cost was the last remaining shred of my sister's future. We walked out of Whitmore's office and back down the long, carpeted hallway. As we approached the glass double doors of the reception area, the receptionist was standing up behind her desk, looking deeply uncomfortable. Standing in the middle of the lobby, clutching a cardboard banker's box to her chest, was Paige. She wasn't wearing one of her tailored power suits. She was in jeans and a bulky sweater, her hair pulled back into a messy knot. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup, and her eyes were red and swollen. A security guard was standing a few feet away, his hands loosely clasped in front of him, waiting for her to leave. She saw me step out of the hallway. She froze, her knuckles turning white around the edges of the cardboard box. It was full of framed photos, a coffee mug, desk organizers, the physical remains of her junior partnership. "Soren," she whispered. The sound carried across the quiet marble room. Holt put a hand on my shoulder. "Keep walking," he murmured. "Don't engage." I tried to follow his advice. I walked toward the elevator bank, my eyes fixed on the brushed steel doors. But as I passed her, she stepped into my path. "Did you sign it?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry. It was totally defeated, scraped out and hollow. "Did Whitmore buy you off?" "Paige, you need to step aside," Holt warned, his tone shifting into something sharp and authoritative. "I'm talking to my brother," she said, not looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on me, dark and frantic. "He fired me, Soren. They escorted me out of the building on Friday night in front of the paralegals. I didn't even get to pack my own office. They boxed it up and made me come get it today. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" "I didn't make you search my credit history," I said, stopping. "I didn't make you send fake legal threats to my boss. You did that. You did it because Mom asked you to crush me, and you thought you could get away with it. I did it to save the house." She cried, the volume of her voice spiking, causing the receptionist to pick up her phone. "The city inspectors came back on Friday afternoon, Soren. They didn't just red tag the cottage. They red tagged the main house because of the unpermitted sewer tie-in. The city is forcing a mandatory shutoff of the water main until the illegal junction is excavated and rebuilt. They have no water. They can't live there. Mom is packing suitcases right now. They're moving into a cheap motel on 82nd Avenue. I stared at her, the reality of the words slowly sinking in. The house, the $1 million property in the West Hills with the terraced gardens and Gerald's woodworking shop in the back. Red tagged, uninhabitable, and my fiancé Paige continued, a tear finally spilling over her lower lash line and dropping onto the cardboard box. "Marcus broke off the engagement last night. His parents found out about the criminal investigation and the city code violations. They didn't want their family associated with a public zoning scandal. He left, Soren. He took the ring, and he left." The silence in the lobby was deafening. The golden child was standing in front of me with a box of office supplies. No job, no fiancé, and homeless parents. "I have nothing left," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You took it all. You took everything." "I didn't take anything," I said, the numbness in my chest giving way to a sudden sharp exhaustion. "You just finally had to pay the electricity bill." I walked around her, hit the elevator button, and stepped inside when the doors parted. Holt followed me. As the doors slid shut, the last thing I saw was Paige standing alone in the center of the marble floor, the security guard gently touching her elbow to guide her toward the exit. The ride down to the ground floor was was completely silent. I watched the digital floor numbers tick down, the polished steel doors reflecting the exhaustion on my face. Holt didn't say a word until we stepped out into the crisp Portland air on 6th Avenue. The wire transfer will clear your account by Wednesday, Holt said, adjusting the collar of his coat against the wind. My retainer is fully paid out of the administrative fees Whitmore tacked on for himself. You keep the full 35. Thank you, Holt, for everything. Don't thank me, kid. You bought this with your own skin. He extended a hand. His grip was rough and firm. Change your phone number. Block their emails. Let them drown. He turned and walked toward the Max station, blending into the morning commuter crowd. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, letting the cold air fill my lungs. By Wednesday afternoon, my checking account balance looked like a lottery payout. I didn't wait. I didn't celebrate. I sat at my desk at the office on my lunch break, opened my banking portal, and called the toll-free number for Providence Hospital billing. Cora answered. She sounded just as tired as she had the week before. This is Soren Thorne, I said. I need to make a lump sum payment on my account. I transferred $32,000. I kept $3,000 as an emergency buffer. With my new salary, I could aggressively pay off the remaining $10,000 over the next year, without starving. When the confirmation number popped up on my screen, I rested my forehead against the edge of my desk and cried. Not sobbing, just quiet, heavy tears that I had been holding on to since the day the tires slipped on the wet asphalt and my tibia snapped. The crushing weight of the debt, the thing Norma had used to make me feel small, the thing that had kept me trapped in that basement, was gone. A month went by. I changed my number. I closed my old email account. I focused on my new job, building out cloud infrastructure for Sullivan's clients. The dull ache in my legs started to fade as the weather turned warm and dry. I didn't hear anything about my family until late June. I was sitting at a corner table at a coffee shop in the Pearl District, typing up some documentation, when I heard someone say my name. Soren? Soren Thorne? I looked up. Standing by the pastry case was Mrs. Gable, the retired nurse who had lived next door to my parents for 20 years. She looked exactly the same, wearing a quilted vest and holding a reusable canvas tote bag. I stood up, suddenly anxious, bracing myself for whatever update Norma had fed the neighborhood. Hi, Mrs. Gable. She walked over, her eyes dropping to my leg, then back up to my face. You're walking well. No crutches. Just a slight limp when it rains, I said carefully. How are things on the hill? She let out a short, dry laugh. Loud. The developers bought your parents' place for a song. Cash offer, as is. They brought in excavators last week to rip out that illegal sewer line and tear down the woodworking shed. The noise is driving my golden retrievers crazy. I digested that. They sold it. They had to. The city shut off their water, and the bank wouldn't give them a loan to fix the foundation issues the inspectors found. They moved out 2 weeks ago, rented a little 2-bedroom apartment out in Gresham. Your mother looked like she swallowed a lemon the whole time the movers were loading the truck. I didn't know what to say. The image of Norma, stripped of her $1 million property and her Sunday brunches, living in a cramped rental in the deep suburbs, felt entirely surreal. Mrs. Gable leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice over the hiss of the espresso machine. Your dad came over to say goodbye. He looked terrible. He mentioned something about your sister moving in with them since she lost her job. Sounds like a full house. She straightened up and adjusted the strap of her tote bag. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You know, Mrs. Gable said casually, I was standing in my kitchen window that morning. What morning? The morning your mother threw your crutches onto the concrete. I heard her screaming at you. I watched you hobble out of there with your garbage bags. She shook her head in disgust. I have 2 sons, Soren. They drive me crazy sometimes, but I would never treat them like stray dogs. She paused, and a small, tight smile touched the corners of her mouth. My nephew works for the city, she said quietly, in the zoning and compliance office. We were having dinner that Saturday, and I just happened to mention that Norma was running a commercial hotel out of a garden shed without fire alarms. I thought they should look into it. The air left my lungs. It wasn't Paige's ex-fiancé. It wasn't the guests from Seattle. It wasn't a random glitch. It was Mrs. Gable. Norma's absolute need to humiliate me publicly, to scream at me in the driveway for the whole neighborhood to see, was the exact thing that triggered her own destruction. If she had just let me pack my bags in peace, she would still be sitting on her patio, drinking champagne. Anyway, Mrs. Gable said, patting my shoulder. It's good to see you on your feet, Soren. Take care of yourself. You too, Mrs. Gable. I watched her walk out of the coffee shop, the bell jingling on the door. I sat back down at my table and looked out the window. The sun was shining on the pavement. The city was moving, people walking by with their coffees and their dogs, totally unaware of the invisible wars being fought in living rooms and law firms. I opened my backpack and pulled out the manila envelope Gerald had given me. I hadn't thrown it away. Inside was the title to the totaled motorcycle, and the number of a scrapyard out in St. John's that bought salvaged engine blocks. I pulled out my phone, my new phone, with my new number, and dialed the scrapyard. A guy with a gruff voice answered. J&R Auto. Hi, I said, my voice steady and clear. I have an engine block from a Kawasaki I need to offload. Clean title. Are you buying? Bring it by, the guy said. We'll weigh it out. I hung up. I put the title back in my bag, closed my laptop, and finished my coffee. It tasted better than anything I'd had in a year. I was finally done paying the electricity bill.